So I had a revelation the other day. We all go crazy over the newest Nvidia RTX 3080 GPUs, the new AMD 6800 GPUs, but is there really a point to this? I think we're going a little bit too far. There aren't even that many games to actually take advantage of this aside from a few small use cases. Are we really driving ourselves crazy just to have newer hardware? Let's talk about what's going on. Hey guys, so today's video is sponsored by CDKDeals, genuine CD keys, not only for software like Windows 10, and we also have a coupon code where you're going to be able to get this for under $20. What you first want to do is go and sign up for an account just to make sure all of your information is in there. You can go and search for, it's going to be the Windows 10 Pro. It's OEM, very easy process. You add it to your cart and you're going to see that you're going to have the option to put a coupon code. You're going to put in CC20. That's my coupon code and you're going to get 20% off, and then you just go through the regular checkout process. Basically, you just have to go in Windows. I'm going to show you how to do this now. You enter the CD key in there and you'll see it's going to work without any issue. And for the price that you're paying, I really think it's a fantastic deal to get a real, genuine, smooth working copies of Windows 10. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology. Remember to subscribe and smash that like button. Some say every time you do, you're able to control yourself whenever a new GPU releases just a little bit more. So let's actually seriously talk about the topic for today. Do we get way too hyped up over new hardware releases? Now, part of it is normal. It's human nature. We love novelty, especially things that are supposed to be really advanced in terms of technology. But sometimes there's diminishing returns, not only within small, minute details of technology, but within the big picture. The other day, I made a video saying, do you really need to upgrade to RTX 3000? Can you wait a little bit longer with whatever you have? And that actually got me thinking a little bit more. And a lot of times, of course, we're excited for the actual hardware. Nobody's going to deny that a 3080 or 3090 really has really great performance over last generation, even if you compare the high end like 2080 Ti. But really, in the real world, when you sit down in front of your computer, how much will you notice? I even had some of my viewers mention that they upgraded to a 3080 or 3090 from like a 1080 Ti. And while, of course, it's much more powerful, they didn't really notice that much of a difference when they're actually playing most of the games that they play. So the main problem here is there just isn't all that much stuff to take advantage of a lot of this powerful hardware. Now, don't get me wrong, there is certainly games that will max out these GPUs, even a 3090 if you're trying to play at 4K. Of course, if you're trying to do VR and you're trying to do sort of all of the really, really detailed resolutions, you're going to need probably a lot more than an RTX 3090. Games like, Flight Simulator 2020, there are cases that these new GPUs are really, really useful, but most people aren't doing these type of maybe more niche or smaller use cases. A lot of people, believe it or not, play the popular like esport games and the games that can basically run on a lot of computers without actually needing a 3080 or even a 3070. So a lot of us get hyped up into not being able to get the new GPUs, but when you sit down in front of your computer, how many of you really feel, let's say if you're already starting at an enthusiast level, how many of you feel that you'll really notice that big of a difference? That's something that I started to notice myself when I upgraded certain pieces of hardware. You really couldn't notice the difference. If you run a benchmark like on faster RAM or even on faster processors and even on GPUs, of course you're going to see a number difference. In and of itself, a benchmark can actually be really satisfying. It could be almost like a game for you to try to beat your max score and do things of that nature. But if you're loading up your game, unless the game was running terribly and it's really too advanced for your hardware, a lot of people are not going to notice sort of the incremental frames per second jumps that you often get. Sometimes, of course, a newer GPU lets you use newer technology like ray tracing, really turn up the eye candy. I separate some of this hardware here for people that really like to be on the bleeding edge of hardware. And of course, that's not everybody. We're talking about sort of the middle here. And likewise, we're not talking about the gamers that have a very underpowered system that they can't sort of comfortably run the games that they want. We're talking about sort of that middle, the average, where most people will fall into. People that sometimes they want to play a game like Cyberpunk or maybe do a little VR, but they're just playing more for the gaming experience and they don't care as much about getting every little less drop of graphical performance or frames per second performance. For those people, and those are the same people that, like me, like everybody else, get really hyped up over new GPU releases, and likewise, they feel bad when they can't get the new hardware like we've had happen over the last few months. So then, as much as we like to have the new hardware, sit down, play your game, and think, is it really going to make that big of a difference? For some people, like I mentioned, it will. Some people need that extra performance, but for most people, and even myself included, I've played some games on the new hardware that I was playing previously on like a 2080 or 2080 Ti. I really didn't notice that much of a difference. If I look at the counter for frames per second, yeah, maybe it was 10 to 20 frames per second better. Felt a little smoother if I really think about it. But if I'm enjoying the game, I really didn't pick up on that difference. And that's another problem that I mentioned before, enjoying the actual game. It seems like we're sort of inundated with so many games nowadays. Even if you open up a console like PlayStation 5 or Xbox, there's a game store with, literally hundreds of games that you have access to. The same thing is true for Steam and on PC. In a lot of cases, this is sort of the nirvana for a lot of people, being able to choose the game that you want to play immediately, have it sort of on your computer without having to go to a store or anything like that. I remember the excitement of actually going to a store, choosing a game that was just released. Maybe every few months you would get something really, really good, coming home, playing it on your system, on your PC as well if you're a PC gamer. But nowadays it seems like there's so much bloatware and so many games that, while even if they're hyped up, if they're great, they just don't seem to be worth the time. A lot of these games just seem to be really drawn out cinematic type experiences, lacking in sort of the really basic gameplay that we grew up loving with certain console games, even early PC games like Quake and Doom and maybe like Warcraft 3 and things like that, where those are still around in certain cases, but the majority of new releases certainly aren't as sort of tactile as that. A lot of them do seem to be really cinematic type games. Nothing wrong with that when it's done in moderation, but some games it just feels like you're not really playing it. You're more like watching a movie and going along, and that brings me really to this point. Even with advanced hardware, is there really a lot of actual content to be able to take advantage of it? I know sometimes I've gotten hardware that, okay, it's a little bit too powerful. Look at maybe like a Threadripper or something like that. And of course, you can use it in video editing and in different things if you really find a use case. But unless you really go and actually try to maximize some of this hardware, it's really going to be a bit overkill, and you can certainly get away with having hardware that's considerably less powerful and you're never really going to notice the difference. Sometimes we think that a few seconds difference with some hardware, if you're rendering or even playing a game in terms of loading, when you're doing a benchmark, a few seconds seems like an eternity, but trust me, if you're going through your day-to-day and it's not like a huge difference, you're never going to notice it. So that's really my point for today. We love shiny new hardware. I'm the first one to admit to it. I love getting the latest stuff, but after a certain while, especially when things are more difficult than before to get, like we've had with the shortages and with the really high prices, you really have to stop and think and say, is this really worth it? Am I actually seeing a tangible difference? For the people that are doing really high-end games or VR, of course, go ahead, get that new hardware. But for most people that are just playing sort of the middle of the road games that you can get away with a little bit less frames per second, maybe it's 1080p or 1440p, not quite 4K, and definitely not 8K. I think when we buy new hardware, a lot of the improvements that we think are basically in our head. They're very theoretical, because when you sit down and actually play the game, if you had something decent before, you really don't notice as much of a difference as you would think. So while it's okay to maybe, bring down the hype a little bit, where it's a little bit healthier and more natural, if you don't get a piece of hardware to be okay with what you have, just tell yourself you're most likely fine with what you have, unless of course you fit into the first category where you really need something to upgrade if it's not managing comfortably the games that you want to play. But it's just something to keep in mind. I don't think we have quite the amount of content and games out there to really take advantage of all of this hardware that we're so crazy over. And when we do have good games and content, a lot of it's going to be a little bit older, like a lot of esports titles. Even Cyberpunk 2077, if you lower the settings a bit, you can certainly play it on many mid-range systems. You don't need the bleeding edge 4K systems to be able to run it, because even in that case with RTX 3090s, it still struggles struggles to run everything at the absolute max. So I think it's great to find the middle ground. That way, perhaps all of this hype over GPUs, a little bit of self-reflection, we can see that it's maybe 90% fluff and it's stuff that we really never needed anyway. Who's to say that a 2080 Ti all of a sudden is obsolete just because a 3080 exists? That's not true at all. It's not like the games and content have really gone forward to be able to make that hardware obsolete. The day that games really are much more demanding, that's when we're going to see these older GPUs drop off. But for the most part, you can certainly have a very enjoyable experience. Alright guys, let me know what you think down below. Are you happy with your current hardware? Are you always chasing the next best thing? Nothing wrong with that, I do it myself, but sometimes it certainly is good to self-reflect. Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.